I operate Hyphae Labs. It is a mushroom potency testing company. Dan operates Rose City up in Oregon, which is a mushroom potency testing company. And then, of course, we would be remiss if we didn't have a talk with probably the person who's doing something, one of the people who's doing the most testing in the country, if not the world, Dave. So, Dave, most of these people have already heard who you are and what you do, but could you just give a brief introduction of yourself and your work for those who just came?
I run the church and I eat a bunch of mushrooms. So, you know, relative to this potency stuff, I do really high dose work. The most I've done is 30 grams in a single dose. I do not recommend it. And now we talk more about how much psilocybin you're consuming, and this has a lot to do with the work that we've been doing through Reggie. But to me, safety is a must. And when you talk about these really deep spiritual experiences, getting into those places safely, understanding what you're doing, and remembering what you did is where we need science's help. So this is still spirituality, but you don't want to go too far, and you have to remember what you did. If you don't remember what you did, why'd you do it?
Thank you for that, Dave. Before we move on to Dan real quick, I'm looking at this graphic behind us really quickly, and I'm wondering if you can tell people a little bit about what we're looking at here.
Yeah, so this is the work that we've been doing through the God Sitters Project to figure out different levels of mushroom work. This is all on the ambrosia.church website. That QR code actually goes to the dosage calculator that we have that generated all this. But what we've tried to do, and keep in mind, this is a first attempt. In no way am I saying this is exactly how everything works. We just need to start talking about how much psilocybin we're consuming and the different levels of experiences. And one of the things that we noticed is that body weight is a significant factor. It's not the only factor, there's a bunch of different ones, but a 100-pound person and a 200-pound person are going to experience the same dose of psilocybin differently. So this is what we've got on our website. There's a whole bunch more up there on ambrosia.church. Is some of the testing results that we've done through Hyphae Lab, which I haven't told you this, but we need to update that and just put a bunch more of your data up there, because it's really helpful for people to see and understand that, you know, a mushroom is not just a mushroom. They're all a little different. And even if you know the strain, a different grower might be different. And even if you know the grower and the strain and the exact environment, some of the stuff that Reggie has shown is that they can vary up to 100% in potency within the same tub. So knowing how much psilocybin you're consuming for the level of experience that you're trying to have is extremely important. If you take too much, you can't take less. You know, it's like salt. You can always add more, you can't add less. And getting into these spaces intentionally is a lot more important than accidentally. If you think that you're only doing 2 grams of mushrooms, but they happen to be the strongest mushrooms that we've ever seen, which there's some really strong mushrooms out there, 2 grams of 5% mushrooms would take me to about 200% of my breakthrough dose. So on these charts, I'm about 250 pounds. It would take me double that entire chart off just 2 grams. So when we're talking about grams, and the whole point of this discussion is just to spread more of this information, that it's more than grams that we're talking about. It's how you consume them, it's who grew them, it's what strain it is, it's how your body's going to react, how your body mass is. You know, there's a whole bunch of different factors, but one of the most important things we got to start talking about is how much psilocybin we're consuming. And Dan actually corrected me. It's psilocybin and psilocin, because psilocybin breaks down into psilocin, but if you're not paying attention to the psilocin in the mushroom, which we do in these calculations if you use the stuff we have on the website, we're just converting psilocybin into psilocin and then giving you the results based on that. But it's in the case in Oregon, and I want him to talk about it because he lives it, they are regulating psilocybin and not psilocin, which becomes a whole different thing that we need to factor in when we're coming up with a new law and a bunch of stuff to talk about. But
on that note, it's a perfect segue right into Dan. Dan, can you talk, tell the people a little bit about your work and maybe how you came to it?
Hello. So Dan, Rose City Labs, Portland, Oregon. I got into mushrooms as a forager, and since I owned a lab, I wanted to know what I was finding in the woods. So I started testing a while back, and then Oregon announced that they were going to get their license, do the registration, so I went ahead and applied. Anyway, we've been doing a lot of different studies. And this one right here, it kind of, let me see if I can go forward a slide or two, but this is we were talking about lemon tech. So basically,
Can you tell the people what lemon tech is real quick?
yeah, so it's where when you're taking the mushrooms and mixing it with lemon juice to change the effects of it with you. And what's happening is the lemon juice is acting as an acid and it's converting it to psilocin. So it just helps the uptake in your body quicker. But what I was trying to get, where we want to talk about here is it's kind of ironic. We use Coca-Cola, orange juice, and lemon juice, and water. And it's kind of amazing that the cola, how well it did compared to the other ones. But what we did was, this is a total potential psilocin content. So let me go back to, yep. Here, in the bottom, you see the blue is the psilocybin, psilocin, and then total potential. You can see how the numbers are starting to go one direction or the other, but the total potential really doesn't change much with the lemon juice.
so this is mushrooms in lemon juice over 5 minutes, 15, 30, and 60?
Yes, and it's just sitting in the stuff, so it's no boiling, no nothing. And so basically, yes, we've noticed that what's happening is it's converting it for you. That's why it's making it happen, and we can see over time how the numbers are shifting, but the total potential is still there.
So just to help explain this a little bit, so psilocybin breaks down into psilocin. There's a lot of people, well, psilocin is the active component in your body. So the point of lemon tech, and this is, to me, this is super fascinating because this has been one of those debates on the internet for a really long time. Like, does lemon tech do anything or not? And nobody's really done it with lab results to see if it does. So I don't know about you guys, but I find this really interesting.
Yeah, I think that this is interesting too. Just you see so many people like repeating or like follow the leader in science, and I've never seen a test like this done to put quantitative data to an anecdote. But I'm sorry to interrupt.
But I mean, you took the words out of my mouth. I mean, this is now whether or not how it's actually going to affect the experience is still the sort of stuff that we have to do. But when you start talking about potency and how much psilocybin you're consuming, there's a bunch of other factors, and whether or not converting the psilocybin into psilocin will make it so that you're going to have a more intense effect or a different effect. I mean, we need people to actually do things where they do lab results, because the other thing that I'm seeing in this is 5 minutes of lemon tech is nothing, right? So we're talking like if you make the lemon tech and let it sit around for 60 minutes, something's actually happening. Which is interesting to me.
Yes, and the top slide kind of talks about orange juice. Within the first 5 minutes, the psilocybin was gone and basically converted. So it kind of made it happen quicker.
So orange tech is better than lemon tech, if that's what you're going for.
It's kind of what it's showing there, yep. The potency, these were all the same starting potency for the mushrooms that we used. So you can definitely see that the potency was like 6.5 on the orange juice versus you're up to 7. So it converts it quicker, but you've lost a little bit with the conversions. So what we try to do is we try to be a myth buster, you know, boil tea or don't boil tea type stuff. And we've just been trying to do that type of studies. But anyway.
You got a boil tea versus non-boil tea slide for us too? Or?
I should have done all the slides, I guess. But yeah, so what happens is if you boil it versus non-boiling it, hitting that boiling temperature actually kind of locks the psilocybin and psilocin where it's at, instead of massively degrading. It's something about hitting a certain temperature really kind of locking in the ingredients, I guess you would say.
Thank you. And then I guess a little bit about myself, and we'll get straight into the. I mean, we could have an hour-long conversation about.
Yeah. Reggie and I are super interested in this shit.
I actually, honestly, am, and don't want to admit it, but I am.
Yeah.
My name is Reggie Harris. You'll see me up here a bit. The reason I'm relevant to this conversation is because we were one of the first people to do psilocybin mushroom potency testing. We did this 4 years ago. At that time, I was a cultivator, and similar to what Dan has done over here, I couldn't sell mushrooms that I was growing based upon anecdotes. And so people were saying, oh, the mushroom is more blue. I want all the blue mushrooms. I don't want any of the other mushrooms. Or they say the caps are more potent. We don't want any of the stems. Just give us all caps. You can't do business that way. And so we got lucky. It was at the beginning of the pandemic. A bunch of cannabis labs were failing. We were up at that time. I think the cost of mushrooms was like $1,900 a pound at that time. So we were good, and we got our science equipment and formed a collective of citizen scientists, and we pursued the method on trying to figure out how to test potency. When we figured out our method and we validated our method, the first thing that we did was something very similar to what Dan is doing, except we didn't even think, quite honestly, to bust Lemon Tech. I wish I had. But the first one for us that we decided to chase after was probably one of the most pervasive myths in mushrooms, and it's what's more potent, caps or stems? You know, it seems very basic science, but like nobody had done the study. And so we did the study and we were off to the races. So similar to Dan's wants to be a myth buster, like I want to be a myth buster too in what we're doing. Because ultimately, when we're talking about these things as sacraments or talking about these things as medicines, being able to properly dose the things that you're consuming is important, because as we all know on this stage, all mushrooms are not created equally.
Absolutely not. I mean, which I think is a good segue into the results that you've been seeing. I mean, what to your knowledge, what's the strongest that you've tested through the lab so far?
Pinaleus bisporus.
Would you remember what percentage?
I don't, but I just remember Pinaleus was bumping up against the upper limits.
Did that 4 or 5 or?
4.5.
Yeah. So, you know, just for some context, in all the testing that we've been doing, we've been just trying to understand as much as we could. It's been a while since we actually have been testing, since we're providing things that have test results and giving or forcing anybody that wants to make chocolates for us or anything to also give you test results, because it's, to me, it should be common sense, but what we're dealing with is generations, literally generations, who have been talking about mushrooms in grams. And 4 grams of mushrooms can mean literally anything. What we've seen in the stuff that we've done through Hyphae directly is a 40-to-1 ratio. So some mushrooms are 40 times stronger than others. Yeah, and that wasn't even the highest. If he's tested close to stuff that's hitting close to 5%, that's actually a 1-to-80 ratio. So some mushrooms are 80 times stronger than others. So when you're dealing with just talking about grams, you're losing the knowledge of how much psilocybin you're consuming. Yeah. And that can lead to some dangerous things. I mean, Reggie came to me a while back and was like, I just had a breakthrough dose off less than a gram of mushrooms. Like, which once you understand the potency and these higher levels and how much psilocybin you're consuming, if you had told me 2 years ago that somebody had a breakthrough dose off less than a gram of mushrooms, I would have told you you're crazy. There's no way somebody's having a full breakthrough experience off less than a gram. And then a good friend of mine who also, this is after we know the testing, so that myth was already broken in my mind, but still, he did less than a gram, and here he was telling me, man, I think I had one of these breakthrough experiences you're talking about. I wasn't, fortunately, you're in a good place. But that becomes the next big problem of why this potency and understanding how much psilocybin you're consuming is crucial. Because if you want to go have a good time, you don't want to do the dose where you leave your body. And if you're thinking you can gauge that based on how many grams of, 2 grams of mushrooms and I'll be fine, and then you do 2 grams of the mushrooms he did, you're not going to be fine. You're going to be leaving, you're not going to die, but the idea of leaving your body or doing something really crazy like stripping your clothes off and running down the street naked, those things happen, and those things happen with the overdose states. So the importance is that you know how much psilocybin you're consuming and that you're in the right place to consume it.
Yeah, so I accidentally consumed 0.7 of what he just asked me, the Pinaleus bispores, thinking that I was just going to have a micro dose on Christmas Eve or New Year's Eve. And I was tripping quite heavily into the new year. So all doses aren't created the same. You want to say something?
I just want to talk about some of the other tryptamines inside of the mushrooms that we're also starting to learn and figure out, which can help contribute to, I feel, these 0.7 doses that are off the chart. And what we're seeing in Oregon is people are actually really getting into cloning and this or that so they can try to replicate a certain mushroom out of their flush. Like he's also mentioning, I just want to touch about the whole fruiting bodies. In Oregon, we have where you can bring it in and test it for whole fruiting bodies or homogenized product. The whole fruiting body, it's hard for the growers to maintain a certain size, shape, and everything to try to get the same dosage. So when you're consuming that, it's a little bit less accurate with the testing than it is with homogenized product. So that's just something else to think about.
Yeah, that's a big thing that we've found, and it's interesting how many things that are problems caused by the law, right? So it's, and with the lack of understanding of the mushrooms themselves, you can't test fruiting bodies and be accurate. In the results that we've seen and Reggie's done through the labs, they vary up to 100% of potency within the same tub. So you can't take a single mushroom and test it, or even a bunch of mushrooms and test them, and tell you every mushroom is this potency or contains this amount of psilocybin. It's got to be homogenized.
So let's kind of have a question here about, so why is it important at the church, and I'll come back to you with another question, but why is it important for you at the church to implement testing? Just a minute ago you said that anybody that wants to do business with the church, you're now requiring test results. Why is it important, and how do you prove that somebody's results are valid and they're not just using the same report over and over again?
Yeah, good questions. It's the most important thing is, again, that dosing chart that we have and understanding where you want to go. Because if you want to have an experience where you walk through the woods and you talk to the plants and have this lower level enjoyable experience, there's a dose to do that. If you want to just go deep into your own mind and sit in your own room and just, while still in this world, go through the thoughts that you need to go through, there's a dose for that. If you want to leave your body and go have a direct conversation with your soul, there's a much higher dose for that. But so without knowing how much psilocybin you're consuming, you have no way of knowing where you're going. You know, you're just trusting in the mushroom. And I trust in the mushroom a lot, but they showed me that this is something very important. I had multiple overdose experiences at our God Sitter house. I've overdosed other people. An overdose is not gonna kill you, but it's more mushrooms than you intend to do. And the non-dangerous overdose is you don't remember what you did. So if you don't remember what you did, why'd you do it? And if you're trying to have a deep conversation with your soul, understand why you're here, get past trauma of this world, you need to remember those conversations. The much more dangerous one is what we call the mushrooms taking over your body. And this happens especially with people who have rarely used mushrooms or think that they've used mushrooms, but they've never gone really deep, and they go way too deep. And this is where you get the people who will strip off their clothes and run down the street naked. That is a situation we need to avoid for a whole bunch of reasons. You know, first off, they don't remember what they were doing. If you want to run down the street naked and you're going to have a good time doing it, and that's your thing, more power to you. If you're going to run down the street naked and not remember what you're doing and come back the next day and feel incredibly embarrassed about it, you did the wrong thing. So avoiding the overdose. Again, you're not going to die unless you get hit by a car. But if you're running down the street naked, getting hit by a car could kill you. The mushrooms didn't kill you, but you died. So we want to really keep people safe. And on the second piece of how do I trust the people, I mean, it's all relationship at this point. We just got this started. So January of this year, we said, hey, if you want to make a chocolate that we work with, if you want to make anything that somebody's going to consume as sacrament, we need to know how much psilocybin's in it. And we're being pretty loose on it too, because this is just getting started. Everyone's been talking about grams of mushrooms since before I was born. You know, so getting the shift to talk about how much psilocybin you're consuming, not to say I don't care about accuracy. If I found out that there was somebody giving me false results, that would be an immediate reason to never work with them again. And we did just get although we do all of our testing through Oakland Hyphae, we did get a machine that we're trying to dial in so that we can do those samples as they come in. You know, for the more detailed results, he's got a better machine. But if we can get a chocolate bar in and test it and say, yes, that matches what you're telling me, then everybody's a lot safer. So we're working on it.
Thank you. My next question is to Dan. So we've been, during this conversation, mainly focused on testing right here in Oakland. Can you tell us a little bit about exactly what you do in Oregon? Because I heard somewhere that you have some sort of exclusive license, or somehow you're like one of the few people who can officially do testing there. Can you talk about that a little bit, and then tell us a little bit about what you're seeing in terms of results or interesting things that you're seeing come in through your studies?
Okay, so as a laboratory, you can actually get accredited by a third-party body to do testing. What the accreditation means is that they've poured over your data and your validation of your methods seem to be in order, and you seem to know what you're doing. Now, the other part of that is a state license. You have to, when the state becomes legal, like here in California, you can apply for a state license, and now you're licensed and accredited. And when you do that, you are allowed to work inside the realm of the psychedelic community that is also licensed and accredited. There's 2 labs in Oregon that are licensed and accredited. Right now, we're the only one of the 2 that are fully licensed and accredited for everything, which means solvents, heavy metals, pesticides, species identification. So we actually use a PCR up there to do species identification.
Can you tell the people what a PCR is? I'm sorry to interrupt.
Yeah, PCR is it's a DNA machine, long story short. It's the same machine that they used for COVID-19 testing. It's finding a certain DNA marker, and what happens is we're looking for a DNA marker in Oregon because Oregon only allows cubensis. So we're looking for specifically a cubensis DNA marker. So that's kind of what.
So you're testing part of your report, or part of your the word is escaping me. Part of what you're testing for and you report out on is actual verification as a cubensi mushroom.
Yes, and again, when people write laws, I guess I should be careful. There's nobody from Oregon. No. When they write laws, they don't really do a very good job. So with the species identification, yes, we do have to report on that. That's required by law. Right now, the only two things required by law are species identification and potency.
Interesting.
And if you make a edible, then we just, again, test for potency. If you make a concentrate, we have to know what you made that with, and we actually would have to test for acetic acid. So they think up there that I guess we're going to make a bunch of stuff with acetic acids and this or that. So we have to make sure that those solvents aren't in there. But those are the only like three things that totally gets tested for. But the species identification test, it's flawed. If you mix Mexicans and the cubensis together, we're still going to get the DNA marker for the cubensis, so you pass. Plus, they only said once a month, so it doesn't specify every batch that month or what. You could pick your own batch that you want tested, so you should be able to pass that test.
I mean, this is a great example of a major problem with a law and a voter initiative where people don't really understand what they're doing, and they're making up things that they pass. I think species identification is great. I think the fact that you have to limit it to cubensis and the whole market's limited to cubensis. I mean, just for total reference, cubensis is considered one mushroom. All the mushrooms that you're aware of, the penis envy, the golden teacher, all these different strains are actually all cubensis. They're just different forms of it. Like we're all people. We just look a little different. That's what's going on. But there's different complete types of mushrooms. So that's one type. I think there's 130 or
there's a lot. Azarescence is one of the most powerful.
Yeah. So there's 140 different creatures that kind of are the same. I mean, it's like, we can't even comprehend what it would be like if there was 100+ different types of things that were almost human but not human. But that's what we're talking about. So to have a law where you limit it to just one species when there's all these other ones that produce things that we can't even understand yet, because we're not doing the testing and we're not using them, there's no way to gain access. And to even think that there's people that might try to get past the law by mixing some cubensis into their non-cubensis. I mean, the whole thing is just beyond ridiculous. But that's where we are in the world of mushrooms at the moment.
And with the potency testing, I think that's really screwed up because we only concentrate on the psilocybin content up there. That's all that that's all everybody's required to label. That's all everything. And long story short, we had a new grower, not really experienced in growing, went and homogenized a big batch of it and stored it incorrectly in the wrong jars, containers, no decadent packs, no nothing, and it converted. Well, he couldn't sell that in the Oregon market because it converted already. I challenged the regulators to take a 3-gram dose of it to tell me that it wouldn't work.
Yeah, it's crazy.
Trust me, it would have worked. It was converted. But he had to destroy that whole batch.
All right, that's a great story. That shit's funny. It would have been even more funny if he said yes.
Yeah.
So this is a question that we have come across in our studies, and it's a very basic question, but I pose it to both of you. Answer as you please. How do you define a dose of mushrooms?
Oh, well, I mean, that's why we put out this body weight ratio and that. I mean, a dose, like there isn't, and there's some science that contradicts this, but I challenge it. There's some science that say dose doesn't matter. Anybody can do the same amount of mushrooms and it will affect you similarly. That is not what we've seen at all. The dose, you need to go to where you want to go for what you're trying to do. Yeah. And that's the dose. And it's really dependent on your experience, your body, what supplements or medications you're on, if you're on anything, and your experience level. When we talk about the high dose work, which we're going to do after this, but you can't, if you were to just, you've never done mushrooms before and you take 150% of your breakthrough dose, I guarantee you won't remember it. And the chance that you might do something crazy like what I described when the mushrooms take over your body, it's pretty high. It's not guaranteed, but at 150%, what's guaranteed is you are not going to remember your experience. When I do 150% of my breakthrough dose, it's the most intense mushroom experience that I can imagine with 100% memory. I remember it as if I remember every second from 1,000 years. That's how detailed the experience is when I come out of it. But again, that's because I've done so many of these doses and I have the experience level. It's akin to bodybuilding or any other sort of working out. Once you're accustomed to these different spaces, you can go deeper. But what your individual dose is depends on the work you're trying to do and your experience level and a bunch of other factors.
That is a little bit of a tough one. I'm a little bit conflicted because I love science, but I also love the ritualistic, just being able to consume mushrooms. So what I've actually been able to do for me, I usually test them by doing, consuming a gram of it, and then I know where it's at, and then I can turn around and dose people accordingly that way. But long story short, in Oregon, we are really getting down to the nitty-gritty and really able to go milligram per gram type dosages, 1 milligram, and we're able to really pinpoint, I guess, starting to better pinpoint where certain thresholds take you. So, I don't know. I probably didn't. I have a hard time answering that one.
It's a hard question. To me, it's not an easy question. That's why I asked it.
It's because, I don't know, but for me, I just take a gram to figure out how potent that is. That's the old way.
Yeah, and we're literally going to talk about that in the next talk with Mudu, because that's how it would be traditionally done. I mean, you wouldn't, like, if you're going to do especially a larger dose, somebody who's experienced would need to let you know.
Yeah.
But, you know, understanding the different amounts of psilocybin and how they affect you is the next phase. To me, it doesn't get rid of the spirituality. It just helps us understand more what we're doing.
Exactly.
So something that just came up in the conversation, the last answer both of you both said, you report out in milligrams per gram. Dave, you prefer your reports to be in micrograms.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about that and what the differences are?
Yeah, absolutely. So micrograms are just a more accurate way of representing the data. And we chose micrograms for a couple of reasons. One, to really emphasize how much you're consuming. 1 milligram doesn't sound like that much. 1,000 micrograms actually sounds like a bigger number. It is a bigger number. When you're talking about microdosing, especially, a microdose of pure psilocybin could be as low as 50 micrograms. So if you're trying to represent that in milligrams, you would be talking about 0.05 milligrams. for us, it just makes a lot more sense, especially with how many people want to understand microdosing, to use that as a scale. But in addition to that, everybody's used to milligrams of THC in cannabis, and 1 milligram of THC, to somebody like me, it doesn't really mean anything. I won't even notice it. I won't even feel it. 1 milligram of psilocybin, or 1,000 micrograms of psilocybin, is past the threshold point for me for a microdose. I will feel it. I will absolutely feel, it won't be an incredibly intense experience, but I will know I'm on mushrooms. So because these things are so important, using micrograms to even talk about the higher doses, you know, when I talk about the most that I've done once I've known the test results, it was about 230,000 micrograms. Now that sounds like a huge number, and it's a lot of psilocybin to consume. That was, I reached an overdose point. I don't remember the whole experience. It wasn't bad, but it wasn't, if I was trying to get stuff done, I don't remember what I did. So 230 milligrams still sounds like a lot, but it doesn't necessarily sound like you should never do that amount. I mean, I can promise you nobody in this room should go above 200,000 micrograms. That if your work leads you there, if you have some tolerance, I'm not saying that nobody could do it, but in the experience that I've been having since I've been acknowledging how much psilocybin I'm consuming, I find with my body weight that about somewhere between 60 to 80,000 micrograms is the work that I like to do. And depending on if I want to go deeper, I do more. And if I think that it's something that I got to do a little less, then I do a little less. But understanding the significance of a microgram of psilocybin is really important to me on the larger scale of things.
Do you want to touch on this at all, or are you good?
I'm pretty good, other than I guess I'm using milligrams per gram just because that's kind of what's been drilled into me by the state of Oregon. That's how we have to report it. But we actually put more information on there that's required, so I actually put percentages also. So anyway, yeah, it's...
Yeah, I mean, again, another example of where the law really needs to be thought through a little bit more. I mean, like, when we're talking about microdoses, so you would have to report a microdose, like if you were doing a microdose edible, you would have to report a 50 microgram microdose as 0.05 milligrams, because that's the language that's in the law.
So I got my next one for you, Dan, is when I move around, as I travel and when I speak, I'm oftentimes bump into students, you know, young people who are very excited. They've never seen anything like this, and they just want to get involved. They want to be a scientist that works in psychedelics. Now, my background has shown me that, like, my lead scientist isn't even a chemist. Like, he practiced something else and taught him what he needed to know in order to do this. And I'm wondering, what advice would you give to anybody who is interested in getting into the field of psychedelic science? They might be a little bit intimidated by the word science, but they're into, like, drugs and information. What advice would you give them?
Well, I kind of do this up in Oregon. I encourage literally everybody to apply. And what I kind of go off of is not necessarily resumes, because honestly, I've hired a few PhDs and a few people with master's degrees, and I find that I get better results from people without some of those degrees sometimes, because they're more hungry and they're really wanting to learn and all of this. So long story short, I started the laboratory in my basement. I do not have a science degree. But I'm an aircraft engineer, pilot, mechanic, machinist.
So not a stupid man.
So you don't have to have a science degree, in my opinion, at my laboratory, except for to meet T&I requirements. T&I which is an accreditation, says you have to have certain schooling, this or that, to be a technical director of a laboratory. But other than that, yeah, no, I got people that don't have that. Actually, one of my field techs, I tell this story all the time, during the interview, he goes, hey, I just wanted to let you know that I have a felony on my record. And I'm like, oh yeah, for what? And he goes, I was manufacturing cannabis oil. And I'm like, really? You're hired? Because he knew how to handle it.
Yeah. Fuck prohibition.
Well, I mean, it's also like you got the experience. That's really what matters. I mean, cannabis extraction is easier said than done, and it can be dangerous. And if you survive it and do your things right, then you know something.
So we got just a few minutes left, and I really want to ask you, Dan, you mentioned earlier in the conversation about your belief in other tryptamines. We also believe that there is something to be said about the other tryptamines working in concert, or I guess as some of my team like to say, ensemble. They say ensemble effect. And I'm wondering what your studies and what your work has, what you discovered in your pursuit of knowledge around tryptamines, particularly about how they impact us when we consume them in trip.
Yeah, so I'm still learning a lot about it, so I don't want to really, there's a lot more to learn. If you try to Google tryptamines, I think you can find ones that say, like baeocystine does this to you, and then other ones that say baeocystine does this to you. And it's really hard and difficult. And what I've been trying and pleading for, and maybe you guys can try to help with this, is if you do have a test result for something, try to see if you can contact the lab, because I'm assuming the lab will make sure that they'll give you all the tryptamines that they tested for, and try to record it like a diary, because this information is really going to help us really solve the problem. Because some mushrooms you consume, you may yawn a little bit more than others during a certain portion of your time, or you may feel more sick to your stomach than you do with others, and I think it's really just a lot more science we need to do behind it. But in Oregon, you're not allowed to write down how your trip was and any of this
That's
information.
crazy.
We're not allowed to record any of that, so I've been asking service centers, and they are starting to do this, to do an opt-in. An opt-in where if the client wants to give this information, they can freely give it. We need this information from you guys.
That shit is so frustrating to me. To hear that you're not allowed to do trip reports is crazy to me.
Yeah, I mean, there's obviously a bunch of things we need to learn from what you're going through up there to incorporate in the initiative that we're going to do. The reason we've really focused on psilocybin instead of the other tryptamines right now is people need to know how much psilocybin they're consuming. And once we're in a world where everybody knows what psilocybin they're consuming, we can start talking about how the other things might affect you. But when you can have a chocolate bar that tells you it's this exact level of psilocybin, these are the other components in it, and you have another chocolate bar that says the same thing but different levels of those components, you can really start to understand those things. We're just not in the world yet. We're getting closer, but if legalization actually happened and you had a whole industry trying to figure out these things and real opportunities for people to participate, that's what happened in medical cannabis. That's why cannabis got so far, is there was no barrier to entry. We could all talk about these things. We could all push the science. There was no barriers to entry. And it turned into a really beautiful thing until a bad law passed. So we need to learn about what they're going through up there, so when we pass our law, we don't limit it to psilocybin, don't limit it to cubensis, don't say that you can't tell me what happened after your trip. I mean, those are just, to me, they're like mind-blowing in how ridiculous the law could be. I think there's another thing that sets a maximum amount of psilocybin that can be given to somebody in a center, and whether that's appropriate or not, the law shouldn't be setting that as a fixed number. That should be something that, you know, we do science around and have safety ratios and realize that, hey, somebody who's 300 to 400 pounds is going to need more than 50,000 micrograms of pure psilocybin to reach the same place that the 100,000 person or 100-pound person will. So, you know, there's a lot that we got to learn. There's a lot that's going on. We have 2 years to pass the law, and this isn't the policy panel, but this is all relevant into what we're trying to do and what the church is trying to push forward.
So the last thing I want to say about the tryptamines, if we can all, you know, I imagine we can all close our eyes and we can think about a smell, a specific smell in life, like your mother's chocolate chip cookies or something. And what that's going to do is it's going to set our body in our mind, and it's going to make us feel relaxed or comfortable. It's just one example of kind of, it all matters in my mind. Terpenes, tryptamines, it all is very, very beneficial.
On that note, that's perfect. It's amazing how advanced a lot of our science is. We can put a person on the fucking moon, you know, and we don't know about these things that have been around for thousands and thousands of years because of prohibition. It keeps us fucking stupid. Dan, as we close out, can you tell folks if they're interested in your work, how they can follow you, how they can keep up, how they can tap in if they want to volunteer with you, or if they want to submit samples, how they can do that?
Yes, you can, you know, I got business cards with me, rosecitylabs.com. It's my legal company for the legal industry, and then I also have a Bright Box Labs because I can't test for the research and development industry, I guess I would say, with Rose City Labs. So, and the Bright Box is spelled BRITEBOX, and then Labs, Bright Box Labs. So that's how you can work with me.
Dave, you've done it once, but
Yeah, I mean, if you can probably find me. Come to the church sometime. Please support us. This all happens because our members support us and allow us to be able to do things like this. If you want to get a hold of me directly, the best way is on Instagram @DaveHemp. That's the easiest direct content for me if you have questions. I just want to thank both of these people for being here because, you know, again, I don't even pretend to be a scientist. This is all spirituality for me. I'm just trying to understand the things that we're experiencing. And without labs who come forward and start testing things and doing experiments, I mean, again, the lemon tech stuff that you put out there, I mean, to me, that was eye-opening because it's one of those things where everybody's been saying, this is the fact. Well, you actually showed some different facts. There's something interesting there, but apparently orange juice is better. So, I mean, it should be orange tech from now on. But just thank you both for everything you do and for being here.
Thank you.
We almost done. We're almost done. If you want to keep up with what I'm doing, it's really easy. On the internet, we have a table out there with QR codes you can follow, but on IG, it's oakland.hyphae, oakland.hyphae. The lab is on IG, Hyphae Labs, spelled straight out. And again, we got a table out there. If you miss it, you can get set up. But yeah, stay tuned. We are local. We're testing. If you want to submit any samples, you can hit us up out there or DM us, and we'll have somebody get back to you. We want to thank you guys for being here and participating in this information. Also, I want to thank these two gentlemen. Can you guys also give these? You gave us a huge hand coming in. Can you please give these motherfuckers a huge hand going out, please? Thank you. And, oh, that feels so good. I love the love. Thank you. And next, we are going to have a conversation that you really don't have anywhere. I have been to conferences all over the world. I have yet to hear people ever really talking about high doses. And so the next talk taking place in 5 minutes is going to be my man Mudu and of course Pastor Dave right here talking about high doses. So if you want a snack, get your water, use the bathroom, be back in 5 minutes. Thank y'all.